The monitor's alarm tore through the room as Mara's pulse collapsed, and Dante caught her before her head struck the pillow. "Mara, stay with me," he said, his voice no longer carrying the cold control of a mafia boss, but the fear of a man about to lose the only person who had ever seen him without flinching. The lead physician checked the vial, then looked up sharply. "It was diluted. She has less than an hour." Vincent laughed from the floor until Dante turned toward him. "The boardroom safe," Dante said. "What opens it?" Vincent's smile faded. "Your brother's death date." Dante went still. For 15 years Vincent had used the wound no one was allowed to mention. Mara tightened her fingers weakly around the Moretti ring. "He wants you angry," she whispered. "Think." Dante looked at her, then at the ring in her palm. His brother had died on January 18th, but the safe had never accepted dates alone. The ring opened Moretti doors, and Mara now held the only key Vincent had not planned for. "Bring the boardroom here," Dante ordered. Within minutes, guards rolled in the encrypted safe from the executive suite across town, escorted by 3 captains and connected by video to the waiting board members. The clock read 11:16 a.m. Mara's breathing had grown shallow, but she refused to close her eyes. Dante knelt beside her instead of standing before his empire. "Tell me what you see," he said. Mara studied the safe's keypad through blurred vision. 4 numbers were worn from repeated use, but a 5th symbol, a small handprint, glowed beside the lock. "It is not a date," she murmured. "It is a memory." Dante understood. The night his brother died, Vincent had found Dante gripping the blood-stained signet ring in his left hand. The safe required the ring and a palm scan. Vincent had assumed only Dante could open it. Dante took the ring from Mara, but the scanner rejected him. "Wrong hand," Mara said. "You were injured that night. You used your brother's hand to close the trust file." Dante's face tightened as the memory returned. His brother had still been alive for 3 minutes, long enough to press his palm against the first Moretti vault and beg Dante not to trust Vincent. The safe had been programmed to recognize the family line, not one man. Dante placed the ring against the lock, then gently pressed Mara's hand over his. The scanner flashed green. Inside lay the real antidote, a recording drive, and a sealed confession written by Dante's brother 15 years earlier. Vincent had arranged the ambush that killed him and built his power from the grief that followed. The board heard every word as the recording played. Vincent stopped struggling. Celeste lowered her head. The alliance collapsed before noon, and every captain voted to remove Vincent permanently from Moretti operations and surrender him, Dr. Halpern, the resident, and Celeste to federal investigators. Dante did not watch them leave. He watched the physician inject the true antidote into Mara's IV. For 10 terrible seconds, nothing happened. Then her pulse rose from 32 to 40, then 50, then 68. Dante closed his eyes and bowed his head over her hand. Mara felt something warm touch her fingers and realized the most feared man in New York was crying where only she could see. "You saved me twice," he said. "Then stop making it difficult," she whispered. A tired smile broke across his face. By sunset, the storm had passed. The Moretti board cancelled the Vane agreement, cleared Mara's name, and appointed an independent ethics council to investigate St. Catherine Medical Center. Dante funded a new patient safety program in Mara's father's name, but he made certain she controlled it. He did not give her a prettier uniform, a smaller body, or a new identity. He gave her authority, respect, and the freedom to choose. 3 months later, Mara returned to the same private wing, not as a frightened night nurse, but as director of clinical safety. Dante waited by the window in a charcoal suit, still feared by enemies and obeyed by powerful men, yet visibly gentler when she entered. "Everyone downstairs is waiting," Mara said. "Let them." He crossed the room, took her hand, and placed the restored Moretti ring in her palm. "The first time you held my hand, you saved my life. The second time, you saved what was left of my soul." Mara's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "And what are you asking now?" Dante lowered himself onto one knee. "For the privilege of holding yours for the rest of mine." She said yes before he could finish, and when they walked into the boardroom together, he did not stand in front of her or ask her to stand behind him. He stood beside her. In the end, the doctors had treated Dante's body, but Mara's courage reached the part of him medicine could not touch. And the woman the world had underestimated discovered she had never needed to shrink to be chosen. She only needed someone brave enough to see her clearly. Would you have trusted Dante after everything he had done to survive, or would you have walked away? Share your answer and subscribe to the channel for more powerful Mafia Boss stories about danger, loyalty, and the kind of love that heals what fear cannot. "Step away from her, Vincent," Dante said, and for the first time in 15 years, his oldest ally did not obey. The security chief stood beneath the red emergency lights with one hand resting near his jacket and the other gripping his radio. On the screen behind him, the frozen image showed him passing the poisoned syringe to Dr. Halpin. Mara's pulse continued to fall, each beep slower than the last, while the only unbroken vial of antidote remained locked inside the evidence case on the counter. "I kept your empire alive while you mourned your brother," Vincent said quietly. "I buried threats, bought loyalty, and cleaned up every mistake your family made. Yet you were ready to throw away the vain alliance because a nurse held your hand." Dante moved between Vincent and the bed despite the fresh monitor leads pulling against his chest. "Her name is Mara." Vincent gave a bitter smile. "That is exactly the problem. You remember her name, but you never remembered mine when power was being divided." Celeste stared at him. "You told me Dante's death would trigger the trust." "It would have," Vincent replied. "Your father would control the board for 30 days, and I would control your father." The young resident stopped smiling. Even Celeste had not known the full plan. Dante looked toward the clock above the door. 10:41 a.m. 79 minutes remained before the Moretti board convened and the death succession clause could transfer control. "Give Mara the antidote," Dante said. "Then you and I settle this without anyone else." "No," Vincent lifted the radio. "At noon, the board receives proof that you are medically unfit. Celeste signs the emergency transfer, and your captains follow whoever controls their money." Mara forced herself upright, though her vision blurred at the edges. "The transfer will fail." Every face turned toward her. Her voice was weak, but her eyes remained clear. "The contract requires Celeste to be legally engaged to Dante at the time of activation. She entered this hospital intending to prove the agreement was still valid, but Dante rejected her in front of witnesses." Celeste shook her head. "A private rejection changes nothing." Mara looked at the security cameras. "This wing records audio. He publicly withdrew consent while you threatened the alliance. The contract cannot survive without mutual consent." Vincent's expression shifted. Mara had found the flaw none of the lawyers had noticed. Dante looked at her with something deeper than gratitude. Even poisoned, surrounded and afraid, she had protected him with the same instinct that had driven her onto that frozen highway 12 years earlier. Vincent raised his radio. "Destroy the recordings." No response came. He pressed the button again. Then the door opened, and 2 Moretti captains entered with their hands visible. Behind them stood the independent medical team and 3 hospital security officers. "Your men heard everything," Dante said. "I changed the private channel while you were watching the screen." Vincent glanced toward the ceiling speaker. His confession had been broadcast to every guard on the floor. For the first time, fear entered his face. He reached for the antidote case, but Mara pulled the IV pole across his path. The metal base struck his ankle, forcing him off balance without sending him to the floor. Dante stepped forward and took the evidence case from his hand. Vincent recovered quickly and drew a compact pistol, but Mara moved before anyone could shout. She grabbed the rolling supply cart and pushed it between Vincent and Dante. The shot cracked into the ceiling. Guards rushed in, forcing Vincent's weapon down and pinning his arms behind him. Dante turned immediately toward Mara. "Are you hurt?" "Still poisoned," she breathed, "so perhaps open the case." He broke the seal with shaking hands and gave the vial to the lead physician. The doctor prepared the reversal agent, but Celeste lunged toward the syringe. Mara caught her wrist. Their eyes met, one woman desperate for power and the other fighting simply to live with dignity. "You looked at me and saw someone easy to erase," Mara said. "That was your mistake." She pushed Celeste's hand away, and the guards restrained her beside Vincent. The physician injected the antidote into Mara's IV. For several seconds, nothing changed. Her pulse dropped to 38. Dante sat beside her and wrapped both hands around hers. "Stay with me. You need to attend your board meeting," she whispered. "I choose you." "Choose both," Mara said, fighting for breath. "Do not burn your empire to prove I matter. Make it worthy of the man you want to become." The words struck him harder than any threat. Dante ordered the captains to move the board meeting to the hospital and transmit Vincent's confession to every member before noon. Then he removed the Moretti signet ring from his hand and placed it in Mara's palm. "This ring opens every door I own," he said. "Until you recover, no order concerning my empire is valid without your approval." Mara stared at him. "That is an unreasonable amount of trust. You earned it before you knew my name." Her monitor began to climb, one beat at a time. Relief moved through the room, but it lasted only seconds. Vincent laughed from the floor. "You think the vial saved her?" Dante turned. Vincent's smile was cold and certain. "That was not the antidote. The real one is inside the boardroom safe, and at noon the lock seals forever." The clock changed to 10:47 a.m. Then Mara's monitor screamed. "What did you put in her?" Dante's voice cut through the red-lit room as Vincent forced the resident's arms behind his back. The young doctor only smiled, blood bright against his teeth. "Something slow enough to make you choose," he said. Mara looked down at herself, searching for pain, blood, anything that explained his words. Then she felt a sting beneath the red marks on her wrist. A bead of blood appeared where Dr. Halpern had grabbed her earlier. Not a bruise, she realized. A puncture. "Halpern injected me," she whispered. Dante was out of the bed before anyone could stop him. The heart monitor leads tore loose, alarms screaming as he crossed the space between them and caught Mara by the shoulders. His face had gone pale again, but the fear in his eyes was not for himself. "Vincent, find Halpern. He left the building 6 minutes ago. Seal every bridge, airport, and train station." Mara gripped Dante's forearm as dizziness rolled through her. "Do not waste time hunting him. We need to know what he used." The resident laughed from the floor. "You have until noon. After that, her heart forgets how to beat." Dante turned toward him with a look that emptied the man's smile. "Give me the name. Sign the vein agreement, transfer your voting rights, and Celeste gets the antidote." Celeste stood near the wall, her face carefully blank. "This is insane. He is trying to implicate me." Mara's knees weakened. Dante caught her before she fell, one arm around her waist and the other beneath her elbow. He did not hesitate at her weight or struggle to hide her from anyone. He held her as if the only thing that mattered was keeping her upright. "Look at me," he said, lowering his voice until the chaos faded behind it. "You kept me alive on that highway. Now let me return the favor." "I do not need a favor," Mara whispered through shallow breaths. "I need a toxicology team." The independent physicians arrived at that moment, escorted by armed guards. Dante placed Mara in the bed he had just abandoned and ordered them to treat her first. "Mr. Moretti, your condition is unstable," the lead physician warned. "So is hers. You could suffer another cardiac event." Dante took Mara's hand. "Then keep me standing beside her." Celeste stepped forward. "The board meeting begins in less than 3 hours. If you miss it, my father invokes the emergency clause." Vincent unfolded the document taken from the resident. His eyes moved rapidly across the page. "There is no emergency clause," he said. "There is a death succession clause. If Dante dies before the engagement is formally cancelled, the Vane family receives temporary control of Moretti shipping through the Joint Security Trust." Dante looked at Celeste. "You did not come here because you heard I was sick. You came to make certain I died before noon." "That contract was written by attorneys," she replied. "I never read every clause." Mara's breathing tightened as the doctors drew blood and connected fresh monitors. She forced herself to study the symptoms instead of the fear. Tingling fingers, slowing pulse, blurred vision, but no sweating and no muscle spasms. "It is not the same drug they gave Dante," she said. "They want you to think it is," the resident muttered. Mara turned toward him. His pupils were wide, his speech too fast, and a faint chemical stain marked the cuff of his white coat. She had seen that color before in the hospital's experimental cardiac wing. "The Vane Foundation trial," she said. Celeste's expression flickered. Mara looked at the lead physician. "A sodium channel blocker developed for arrhythmia research. The trial was suspended because the dose became unpredictable. The physician stared at her. How do you know that? I read the safety bulletin after a patient was transferred to my floor last month. Dante's hand closed more firmly around hers. Even poisoned and frightened, she was still the sharpest person in the room. There was an emergency reversal agent, Mara continued. Blue-labelled case, locked refrigeration, research pharmacy on the 6th floor. Vincent spoke into his radio, but the answer came back immediately. The 6th floor pharmacy had been emptied 20 minutes earlier. Celeste slowly moved toward the door. A guard blocked her path. "Search her car," Dante ordered. "You have no right," she snapped. "You tried to purchase my death with her life. Rights are no longer the conversation." Mara's pulse dropped on the monitor. Dante sat beside her and covered her cold hand with both of his. "Stay with me." She tried to smile. That was my line. Then hear it the way I did. His voice broke on the final word, revealing the man beneath the empire. "You are not dying today, Mara." Vincent's radio crackled. The antidote case had been found in Celeste's limousine, but every vial inside had been shattered except one. Celeste's composure finally collapsed. "You cannot prove I put it there." "We do not need to," Mara said weakly, staring at the security screen across the room. During the blackout, the hospital system had restarted and restored an archived recording from the medication room. The image flickered into focus. Dr. Halpern appeared first, holding Mara's stolen badge. Then another figure stepped beside him and handed him the syringe. It was not Celeste. Dante rose slowly as the figure turned toward the camera, revealing the face of the man who had stood beside him through every war for 15 years. Vincent Russo. "Then lock the doors," Dante said, his voice so calm that Vincent moved before anyone else could breathe. The security chief sealed the private wing, stationed guards at both elevators, and ordered every staff member on duty to surrender their badges and phones. Mara stood beside the bed, staring at the note as if the 7 words might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. "Someone put that in my locker," she said. "Which means they had access to the nurse's station," Vincent replied, "and they knew you were the one who stopped the drug." Dante watched Mara's face, not the evidence. He saw the fear she was trying to hide beneath professional calm. "Sit down," he told her. "I am working." "You are shaking." Mara looked at her hands and hated that he was right. She folded them against her stomach. "I am not one of your employees." "No," Dante said. "You are the reason I am alive." Before she could answer, the door opened and a woman in a cream designer coat stepped inside as though the armed guards belonged to her. Celeste Vane was tall, polished, and famous enough to appear on magazine covers beside senators and billionaires. She was also the daughter of a banking family whose alliance Dante had been expected to secure with an engagement. Her gaze moved from the monitors to Mara's full figure, lingering just long enough to make the insult clear without a single word. "Dante," Celeste said, crossing the room, "I heard there was an incident. You heard quickly. Half the city heard your men surrounded a hospital." She leaned toward him, but Dante turned his face before she could kiss his cheek. Celeste's smile tightened. Then she noticed Mara standing within reach of his hand. "And who is this?" "Mara Ellison," Dante said, "the nurse who saved my life." Celeste gave a soft laugh. How heroic. Mara had heard that tone before, wrapped in sweetness and sharpened underneath. "I was doing my job." "Of course. Though most nurses know when to leave the room after the doctors arrive." Dante's eyes hardened. "Most doctors in this hospital nearly killed me." Celeste looked toward the note on the table. "Then perhaps the nurse should explain why her badge was found near the medication room." Mara's breath caught. Vincent turned toward her. "How did you know where the badge was found?" The room went still. Celeste recovered quickly. "One of the guards mentioned it downstairs." "No guard was informed," Vincent said. Dante's expression did not change, but his fingers curled against the blanket. Celeste glanced between the two men and smiled again. "You cannot seriously think I had anything to do with this." "I think you walked into a sealed floor without being searched," Dante replied. "That concerns me." Mara stepped away from the bed. "I should leave while you handle this." Dante reached for her wrist, then stopped before touching the bruised skin. His hand remained suspended between them. No one leaves until I know who tried to use your name to bury their crime." The restraint in the gesture unsettled her more than a command would have. He was dangerous enough to stop an entire hospital, yet careful enough not to touch where she had been hurt. Celeste saw it too, her eyes darkened. "Dante, you are risking a $20 billion agreement over a nurse you met tonight." "I met her 12 years ago." The answer landed like broken glass. Celeste stared at him. Mara looked away, suddenly aware that everyone in the room understood the significance before she did. Dante Moretti remembered almost nothing with tenderness, yet he remembered her hand through 12 winters. Celeste removed her gloves one finger at a time. "Your board meets at noon. My father will withdraw his support if this scandal grows. Then he can withdraw it. You would endanger your shipping empire for her? I would endanger it for the truth." Celeste's smile vanished. Do not confuse gratitude with loyalty. Women like her survive by making powerful men feel needed. Mara flinched before she could stop herself. The words reached every old wound, every date who had hidden her from friends, every supervisor who had praised her kindness while laughing at her body behind closed doors. Dante noticed the change in her eyes. He pushed himself upright despite the monitor's warning. "Use her name," he said. Celeste blinked. "Excuse me?" "Her name is Mara. You will speak it with respect, or you will not speak in my presence." Mara looked at him, stunned. No one had ever defended her without making her feel like a burden afterward. Celeste's cheeks flushed. "You are not thinking clearly." "For the first time tonight, I am." A sudden alarm sounded in the hallway. Vincent reached for his weapon as the lights flickered and went dark. Emergency power flooded the room in red. A guard shouted from outside, followed by the crash of a metal cart. Dante grabbed Mara's hand and pulled her behind the bed, just as the door swung open. A masked figure raised a syringe instead of a gun and lunged directly toward Mara. She caught the attacker's wrist, drove her shoulder forward, and knocked the syringe against the wall. Vincent tackled the figure to the floor. The mask came loose. Under it was the young resident who had mocked Mara earlier. Blood ran from his lip as he looked past Vincent and smiled at Celeste. "You promised my debt would disappear," he gasped. Celeste stepped backward. "I have never seen this man." The resident laughed once. "Then ask her why your engagement contract says Dante must die before noon." Vincent searched his pocket and pulled out a folded document stamped with the Vane family seal. Mara looked at the clock. It was 9:17 a.m. Dante's grip tightened around her hand. Then the resident whispered the final truth that froze the room. The poison was only the first attempt. The second dose is already inside her. "Dr. Halpern," Dante whispered, his fingers still locked around Mara's hand. "Take your hand off her." The physician looked down and realized he was still gripping Mara's wrist hard enough to leave red marks. He released her immediately, but Dante's dark eyes had already sharpened with the cold authority that had made judges avoid his name and rival families lock their doors before sunset. The monitors continued their steady rhythm as thunder rolled beyond the windows, yet the room felt quieter than a church at midnight. "Mr. Moretti, you have suffered a serious reaction," Halpern said, forcing confidence into his voice. "You need to remain calm." Dante did not look at him. He kept watching Mara. She stood beside the bed in rumpled navy scrubs, her full figure tense beneath the fluorescent lights, one hand still trapped in his grip and the other holding the empty injector that had saved his life. "I asked a question," he said. Mara glanced at the red marks around her wrist. "No one hurt me. You lie badly, and you intimidate people while attached to 3 machines." One of the guards inhaled sharply. No one spoke to Dante Moretti that way. For the first time since opening his eyes, something almost human moved across his face. Not amusement exactly, but recognition. Mara was still the same woman from the highway, the stranger who had ordered him to breathe while blood filled his lungs and snow covered the shattered windshield. She had not known his name then, and she did not seem impressed by it now. "Everyone out," Dante ordered. Dr. Halpern stepped forward. "That would be medically irresponsible." Dante shifted his gaze toward the physician, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You ignored the nurse who identified the reaction, administered a medication that nearly stopped my heart, and put your hands on her when she tried to correct your mistake. You are no longer responsible for anything concerning me." Halpern's face drained of colour. "Hospital policy does not allow a patient to dismiss the entire medical team." Dante looked toward his head of security, Vincent Russo. "By the hospital." Vincent nodded once. "Before sunrise? Before breakfast?" Mara stared at him. "You cannot buy a hospital because a doctor annoyed you." "He did not annoy me. He almost killed me." "Then file a complaint like a normal person. I have never been accused of being normal." Despite herself, Mara nearly smiled. She stopped it before he could notice, but Dante noticed everything. He ordered Vincent to bring in an independent medical team and preserve every syringe, chart and security recording from the floor. Halpern protested until 2 guards escorted him from the room without touching him more than necessary. The young resident who had mocked Mara lowered his head and tried to follow. "Not you," Dante said. The resident froze. "You told her to stay in her lane." Dante's voice remained quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. "Her lane led to my pulse returning. Yours led to a death certificate." Mara stepped closer to the bed. "Do not threaten him." "I did not." Dante's gaze stayed on the resident. "I explained his performance." Then he instructed Vincent to ensure the resident was removed from his case and reported for ignoring a nurse during a life-threatening emergency. No violence, no shouting, only consequences delivered with the precision of a signed order. When the room finally cleared, Mara tried to pull her hand away. Dante loosened his grip immediately. That surprised her more than his power. Men who frightened others often mistook control for permission, but he released her the moment she resisted. "You remembered the highway," she said. "I remembered your voice every winter for 12 years. His answer was softer now. "You called me stubborn. You were bleeding through my coat and arguing with the paramedics. It was an expensive coat. It was ugly." The corner of his mouth lifted. Then pain tightened his face, and Mara instinctively adjusted his oxygen line. She checked his pupils, pulse and breathing while he watched her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable for reasons she did not want to examine. "Why did you become a nurse?" he asked. "Because someone stayed with my father when I could not." Her voice changed, and Dante did not press. Instead, he noticed the exhaustion beneath her eyes and the small tear near the pocket of her scrubs. "How long have you been working?" "That is not your concern." 17 hours. Vincent answered from the doorway. Mara turned sharply. He held her personnel file in one hand and a clear evidence bag in the other. Inside it was the medication vial Dr. Halpern had used. "The pharmacy record says this drug was never ordered," Vincent said. "Someone switched the label." Dante's expression became stone. Mara looked at the vial, then at the IV line, understanding the truth before anyone said it aloud. His collapse had not been an accident. Someone inside St. Catherine had tried to kill him. Vincent placed a second evidence bag on the table. It contained Mara's missing employee badge and a folded note found inside her locker. Dante opened it with gloved fingers. The message held only 7 words. "You should have let the Mafia boss die." Mara's face lost its colour. Dante slowly turned toward her, every trace of weakness disappearing from his eyes. "You are not leaving this room," he said, "because whoever poisoned me already knows your name. If he stops breathing, everyone in this hospital dies with him," the gunman warned as thunder shook the windows of St. Catherine Medical Center. But the woman standing beside the dying man did not look at the weapon. She looked at his hand. Mara Ellison, a 32-year-old plus-size night nurse, had spent the last 11 hours being ignored by doctors who believed quiet meant weak. Her navy scrubs hugged a full figure she had been taught to apologize for, though her hands never trembled when patients were afraid. Earlier that evening, a young resident had smirked when she suggested the patient was reacting to the medication, not the bullet wound. He told her to fetch clean linens and leave real medicine to real doctors. Mara obeyed because she needed the job, the insurance, and every dollar that kept her widowed mother in a safe apartment. Then the monitors screamed. The man on the bed was Dante Moretti, the 40-year-old mafia boss whose name could empty a courtroom and silence an entire street. He owned shipping companies, luxury hotels, and enough influence to make powerful men answer calls at 3 in the morning. Tonight, none of it mattered. His skin had gone pale, his pulse was collapsing, and 6 specialists were arguing over him, while armed guards blocked every exit. Dante had survived betrayal, ambushes, and the murder of his younger brother, but he had not survived trust. Even unconscious, his jaw remained tight, as if his body refused to surrender control. Dr. Halpern pushed another syringe into the IV. Mara saw Dante's fingers jerk. She saw the rash spreading beneath his collar, the swelling at his throat, and the faint blue edge forming around his lips. "He's allergic," she said. No one listened. The resident who had mocked her stepped between Mara and the bed. "Stay in your lane, Nurse Ellison." Dante's heart rate plunged. A guard lifted his pistol toward the ceiling and shouted that somebody had better save his boss. The room erupted into panic, but Mara moved through it with the steady courage that had carried strangers through their worst nights. She reached past the resident, shut off the medication, and pulled the emergency kit from the wall. Dr. Halpern grabbed her wrist. "What do you think you're doing?" "Saving the patient you stopped seeing." Mara answered. For one breathless second, every face turned toward the woman they had dismissed. Her cheeks burned, not from shame, but from the memory of every teacher, boyfriend, and supervisor who had treated her size like evidence against her. She swallowed the hurt and held out her hand. "Epinephrine now." The resident hesitated. Mara snatched the injector herself, delivered the dose, and watched the monitor refuse to improve. Dante's pulse vanished. Someone cursed. Dr. Halpern began compressions while another physician called the time, already preparing the room for failure. Mara stared at Dante's closed fist and noticed something none of them had seen. A thin scar crossed his palm, old and pale, shaped like the mark left by broken glass. Her breath caught. 12 years earlier, before nursing school, Mara had pulled a bleeding stranger from a wrecked car on a frozen highway outside Albany. She had pressed her bare hand over his wound until paramedics arrived, and he had gripped her fingers without ever opening his eyes. She had never learned his name. Now she knew. Mara stepped beside the bed as the doctors worked, ignoring the guard, the insults, and the terror squeezing her chest. She wrapped both hands around Dante's cold one. "You are not dying tonight," she whispered. "Not after surviving that highway, and not while I'm here." The monitor gave one weak beep, then another. Dr. Halpern froze. Dante's fingers tightened around hers. His pulse returned, faint but steady, and the room fell silent around the nurse nobody had respected 5 minutes earlier. Mara looked down as Dante's eyes opened, dark, disoriented, and fixed only on her. He studied her face as if waking from a 12-year nightmare. Then, in a voice too weak for a feared mafia boss, but strong enough to stop everyone breathing, he said, "I remember your hand, and who hurt you."